Hey everyone, it's Nicole, aka the Groovy Writer, on the road yet again. Today I want to talk about rights reversions for published writers, what they are, what they mean for writers, and why I think it can be really tough to find good information on rights reversion and what to do if rights revert back to you as an author. There are some resources out there, but if you try to really go deep and do some research that will help you navigate what happens after a rights reversion, I've always been surprised at how tricky that can be. Okay, so some of you may not ever have heard this term rights reversion before as writers or as authors. Probably if you are a published author, especially if you've been traditionally published in some way, whether it's a big house or a small press, you have probably at least heard the term. So what a rights reversion is sort of exactly what it sounds like. It's when the rights to a work, to a book, to short story collection, chapbook of poetry, what have you, revert back to the author. Essentially, a rights reversion is when your publisher says, yep, we're done with this, we're not printing any more copies. Today that model has changed a little bit. The old model was that they would always do some sort of a print run, whether it was a small print run where they would print maybe 500 copies, not knowing how a book would do, or a very large print run, in the thousands or tens of thousands if they thought they had a big bestseller on their hands. I do think pod, print on demand, has changed that somewhat, but I'm no expert in that area. That's just my casual research has told me that. Anyway, regardless, a rights reversion is when a contract is basically made null and void. And the rights to a book go back to you. It's as if, it's not as if the book was never published, but it's no longer being published by that publisher. In other words, it's no longer being printed and distributed through that publisher's various outlets. And it is now squarely back to sort of square one. It's back in your lap as an author. So why would publishers ever agree to do a rights reversion? I have to be honest, I really don't know. I mean, technically, a publisher could hold on to a book indefinitely, whether or not they were promoting it, whether or not they were still printing copies, but it's not uncommon. I know both of my book contracts with traditional publishers had in the language that, gotta put my sunglasses on, it's bright, had in the language that should the book go out of print, meaning should the publisher decide we're just not going to be printing any more of these books because sales are low typically, or what have you, for whatever reason. My publisher, I'll just say this now rather than waiting, the reason my rights were allowed to be reverted back to me was because my publisher contacted my then agent and said, we're no longer going to be publishing young adult fiction. They wanted their catalog to be strictly focused on young kids literature, picture books, board books, younger than young adult. I don't know if they were even doing middle grade. I think they wanted to focus on little kids. So my book that had been with them at that point for 6 or 7 years, I want to say, and I was happy with that publisher. They were great. They treated me well. It was a smaller publisher, but still a well-known New York house. I thought that's interesting. So it was sort of, they came to me about the rights reversion. I didn't, or they came to me, about with the background information that preceded the rights reversion. I didn't have to really go knock on their door and prepare, a big spiel to get my rights back. I basically said to my agent, hey, can we get the rights back then if they're not going to be publishing young adult anymore and it doesn't fit their catalog, moving forward. And that was as simple as that. I literally got a statement back from the publisher on the publisher's letterhead saying rights have completely reverted to the author. So that was pretty cool. I think I got off pretty easy there. I think some authors who do this have to do a little more of a song and dance. It's not always easy to convince a publisher to allow those rights to be reverted back. And there are some technicalities. So again, the typical scenario, a publisher writes into the contract, okay, if the book ever goes out of print, the rights can be reverted. Could they theoretically just print a very, very small minimum number of copies to keep the rights? I guess so. That's where really, and this is a separate episode, but that's where having a very good agent, it's one of those little, there are all sorts of nooks and crannies to publishing contracts. And that is one of the things that I think many authors, especially debut authors, don't think about. What happens if? What happens if my book is no longer being promoted, no longer being printed? The publisher just has it, but they're not doing anything with it. That's where you really want a good agent to be able to go in there and negotiate for you on behalf of the author, so that at some point down the road, it's hard to think of this when you're a debut. I remember that clearly. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know what to expect. So it's hard to know to expect this. But I will tell you, anyone who has a book out on submission, or who has an agent who's getting ready to put a book out on submission, I would have that conversation with them. At some point, if the rights revert to me, what's the sort of language we want built into the contract around that? Anyway, that's also, I'm realizing, kind of another episode. So what happens then? Your rights are reverted back to you as an author. Maybe your book's been with this publisher for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it might be. At some point, for some reason, they are willing to release the rights to you. Here is where authors have a choice to make. And there are different options. I think the main two options are still try to shop the book around for re-release with another publisher. I'm not going to make any huge blanket statements here, but the commonly accepted wisdom up to this point has been good luck with that. The book has already done its thing. It's already been out there. It's already had readers. It sort of had its arc. Maybe it's done really, really well, or maybe it was just mid-list from the beginning and didn't sell a ton, but did okay. Had kind of a steady stream of readers, and now it's maybe a little dead in the water. And what publisher, realistically, if you think about being a business person, it's hard to imagine a publisher really salivating over that, really being excited about that. The other option, and again, I'm sure there are multiple options, but these are the main two. So the other one I want to talk about is going indie, and I'm going to use that term for self-publishing. So self-publishing and going indie. Indie's a little bit quicker to say. And different people will say, well, indie doesn't mean that. Indie means something else. I get it. But I'm going to, for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to use that term indie. So going indie with this book, this manuscript, it's already been edited. That's one of the lovely things. So it's already been edited. But here's what I hear from authors and typically this is students of mine, when we talk about rights reversion, we talk about anything related to self-publishing. Either people tend to be really into it or not. Anyone who knows the work entailed in self-publishing will either say, yep, I'm up for it. I want control of my material. I want control of promotion. I want total control of cover design. I will hire an editor. I will hire a cover designer or not. And I'm in. Or people look at the work that self-publishing entails, and it is a lot of work, I can tell you from experience, and they'll say, nope, I don't want any part of it. I'm a writer. I want to write. I used to be in that camp firmly, by the way. I want to have the art department doing cover design. I want that nice advance from a publisher. I want, and I get that. I was there, and that is, again, another episode, the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing. And there are many videos and many websites out there that talk about that. So, two choices: try to find another publisher or self-publish, go indie. And I did the latter with that book. I initially, when this happened, this was, I want to say 2019. I could be wrong, somewhere around there, when the rights reverted back to me. It took me a long time to really do anything. But at first, I said to my agent at the time, hey, can we try to put this back out there? And it was pretty much, yeah, that sort of commonly accepted wisdom of, not probably going to happen. So then I thought, well, what if I self-published? And I just wasn't ready. It took me a few more years before I was ready to seriously entertain that thought. I was working on another project that was going to go out on submission. I was teaching. I just was not ready to learn this whole new world of going indie with it. So I sat on it. I basically put it away in a drawer, didn't do anything. Figured when the time was right, I would know what to do. And I did, incidentally. So those are kind of the choices. And I do think if you have had a book that has done reasonably well, again, it doesn't have to have been a bestseller, and you got an agent for that book, the agent was able to sell that book, the book was subsequently edited, proofread, copy edited, a cover was designed. I did change my cover, and I think that's something many people probably do. But if you have a product that has been taken to that level of, what do I want to say? I don't want to say like excellence necessarily, but that level of care has gone into creating the finished, publishable product. Boy, I think it is absolutely well worth it to learn what it will take to re-release that title under your own imprint. And there are hurdles, there are hoops to jump through, many of them psychological for people. I think going indie carries much less stigma than it used to, but I absolutely used to see that stigma of, why would I do that? Self-publishing, that's something, that's not really legit. And again, this is, 10 years ago, but even in 2018, 2019, I can't remember, I should have checked this when I got those rights back. Even then I thought, I don't know, most of my hesitation was about the work involved, but I still felt some of that. I've been traditionally published. I don't want to go backward and indie publish. And I kind of recognize now that was not, that was a shame that I felt that way, because I could have gotten on the indie bandwagon a lot sooner. And again, that's a whole nother episode. But I do want to say, if you have a book out there that was published, again, maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, and nothing's happening with it, maybe it's not technically out of print, but the publisher really isn't doing anything with it, maybe it's not even listed on their website, no one ever really talks about it, it's just kind of out there, I would talk to your agent, or if you don't have an agent, talk to your editor directly, or whoever now is the editor. There's a lot of turnover in publishing, so if your book has been out there for years and years, odds are, someone has moved on. But talk to whoever the rights person is for your book at the publishing house and say, hey, I'm just wondering if it would be a possibility to do a rights reversion, since you guys really aren't doing anything with this book. See what they say. You never know. I do think it can be helpful to have someone speak on your behalf. So if you do have an agent, that is something I would do first, is talk to your agent about it. And in another episode, a future episode, I can talk more about my process with the rights reversion, where I went from the stage of getting my rights back, where I went from there. And I will just tell you right now, that book is Brianna on the Brink. It was my debut young adult novel. And it's been a whole journey since then. I ended up very quickly, and I can again talk more about this process later, but I ended up updating the book, because it was young adult, which can age pretty quickly, right? So I updated the book, just did some editing. I didn't change any major plot points. I didn't change anything major about the book, but some of the language, some of the slang, some of the references, old cell phone references. If you think about, this book came out in 2013. I wrote it in, starting in, I think, 2011. So some of the cell phone references were hilarious to me. So things like that. I just updated a little bit, re-released it, got a new cover, and I'm super pleased with the results. So if you are on the fence about asking for a rights reversion, or if maybe rights have reverted to you, but you are in that stage of, now what? I encourage you to not sit there like I did for too long, hesitant to take some sort of action. Go ahead and have your agent query other publishers, or you query other publishers. You're the rights holder. If your agent isn't interested, and I would not be surprised if many agents just were like, no, I'm not interested in doing that. That's not a good use of my time / our time. So go ahead, query publishers. Maybe go to some smaller publishers and let them know the situation. Maybe do some research on publishers who are willing to take rights reverted books. Although I will tell you again, I sort of hit a wall with that, and I wasn't able to find too many sources there. So anyway, I wish you luck if you're in that position, and I hope this has been somewhat educational if you didn't really know what rights reversion was and how it might impact you. If you have any questions about this topic of rights reversion, or really any topic that you'd like me to address, feel free to leave a comment, and if you subscribe, that would be awesome. All right, I'll see you all soon.